Introducing your chair for this Inspired Living webinar, Head of Content for Real Homes and Homebuilding and Renovating magazine, Michael Holmes.
Good evening and welcome to the first of our new online events for homeowners created by Schüco and Architecture Today. The aim of the event is to offer a glimpse into the way architects can help clients to unlock the full potential of their homes and turn their vision into reality. We're delighted to have assembled a panel of three architects: Ben Cousins from Cousins & Cousins, Matthew Giles from Matthew Giles Architects, and Jeremy Foster of J. Foster Architects. Welcome, everyone. Between them, they have over 100 years experience of working with homeowners to deliver stunning projects, sometimes from quite difficult starting points, as you will see in some of the stories and projects we will be looking at over the next hour or hour and a half. In a minute, they're going to be sharing some of their favourite projects and demonstrate how it's possible to bring a sense of space, freedom, flexibility and light even into the most modest of homes. We'll have opportunities for a few questions immediately after each of our three presentations, and then a wider Q&A panel at the end of the sessions. So please do feel free to raise any thoughts or questions you may have about embarking on a project of your own. We also have on hand technical expertise. Schüco's UK Architectural Project Manager, Jordan Vincent. Hi, Jordan, is here to help you with any technical questions you may have about your project or anything you've seen in our architect presentations. You can post your question at any time throughout this webinar, and we do get lots of questions, so please do make sure that you get in early. Click away, you just have to enter the question into the screen at the bottom. If we don't get round to answering everybody, then just make sure you've included your email and we will reply to you laterwards. So we'll try and squeeze in as many as you can, but do keep those questions coming. So let's hear from the first of our architects, Jeremy Foster of J. Foster Architects.
Thank you very much. Today I am going to talk about the Narrow House, which in summary is a sensitive intervention to a very small coach house. So it's a Victorian coach house in the Tufnell Park conservation area, which is in London, in Islington. It belonged to the neighbouring villa and was separated and sold off as a standalone house in the 80s. So I'll just point and show you which one it is. It's this very small facade here, and that's the house it used to belong to. And really the nature of this project was taking on something that had been neglected for decades and transformed it into something flexible and modern and pleasant to live in, whilst also adding a significant amount of extra area, all concealed behind this tiny facade. So yeah, the street view is quite deceiving in that you can't see any of the new project. So it's all sort of concealed behind the existing brickwork facade. But then at the back, there's basically a new 3-bedroom house, whereas the original brief was just to extend the house for the client. We ended up doing quite a lot more than that, but I'll discuss that in more detail. And really, yeah, the ambition was to bring in as much light and the feeling of space in what is, you know, a very tiny plot. So as I say, it's 3 meters left to right between the brickwork wall and the back of the kitchen units. And there was sort of carte blanche actually with the aesthetics. So you'll see there's quite a sort of limited palette of materials. The backstory is quite an involved planning process. So it's a conservation area. There are large houses next door that have lots of historic additions that we weren't necessarily going to follow. But actually the council was on board. We did a pre-application process, which started an early dialogue, which I always recommend. And that enabled us to maximise the volume and the area that we were able to put on this site. The context is always important when you're making external changes. So we took on some of the existing brickwork details at the rear and incorporated those into our facades. And things like window colours and fenestration patterns. Again, we deviated. We weren't trying to do sort of traditional mimicry or pastiche, so they're sort of uncompromisingly modern. And this is just really an idea of the mass we were playing with. So these coloured blocks at the front are what we created, and that's how it nestles in between its neighbours. So really an insight into how a project like this starts. It's a sketch. It's fairly crude. So there's pencil crayon and Tipex, and it's overlay paper. But the sketch that really got the client excited and got me interested was the level changes and how we could basically introduce a third floor into this tight plan. And this is really the concept that stuck and you'll see in the end photos, was carried through to the end result. The site, as I say, it's north facing, so north is this side. So the two front rooms get lots of daylight, but the main rooms for the client, which were the bedroom, the kitchen and the study, don't receive any direct sunlight. So again, the sketch is just showing, okay, well, how are we going to pull down light into the center of this plan to stop it being gloomy? And really the split section also gave opportunities for storage. So the original house was 50 square meters and the new house is 70 square meters, and every square centimeter is used for something. So every nook and cranny, including ceiling voids and the bits left over from the split levels overlapping, became storage cupboards. And I've said there for cases, bags, shoes and ropes. So the client is an avid climber, so he has lots of gear. And this is just an illustration before and after of what we did. So we dropped the kitchen floor down at the rear, which is here. There was an existing sort of basement void here, but the client chose not to use that, and that was really just driven by budget. But we did use that volume at the back, and that allowed us to basically create 3 floor levels at first floor, and then sneak in storage voids, and then a study at the top floor, which is here. So again, the staggered plan really enabled us, and you can see the kind of storage cupboards here, really just to maximize and optimize the area, whereas the existing had these enormous ceiling voids which were just dead space. So the original height of the front room was retained. So this is probably the height it was when it was a coach house. And that was important. So the memory of the original building at the front is retained throughout. But then as you go deeper into the plan, it's something altogether different. So again, you can sort of read the level changes here from the kitchen up to the main reception room, and then the stair up to the bedrooms beyond. And that's just looking back. So again, really generous height. So 3.7 meters there. This is obviously before it was furnished, but we basically kept modernized. So slim light double glazing to the front, new front door. So every opportunity to improve thermal insulation and reduce energy use of the building was taken. Acoustic insulation was improved to the party walls. And as I say, the front facade is the original Victorian brickwork, but everything else is new. some of the quirks of the plan. So a glimpse through from the stair going up to the kitchen, which is stepped down. So you get some quite interesting kinetic views as you go up and down the stair. And really incredible heights in the kitchen. So this is well over 4 meters, because we basically basically internalized the void below the second flight and given that over to the kitchen. So really having some fun with the section. The kitchen joinery is oak, the floor is polished concrete, and the exposed brickwork is Peterson. So really just yeah, a very stripped down palette, and again carrying the concrete out to the external patio. So the house is designed along its axis, the north-south axis, to connect the ground floor spaces to the garden beyond, and it's quite a small garden. There are pocket doors used throughout, again, just to maximise sort of useful areas of plan and not avoiding stagnating any areas with door swings. And this just provides a seamless connection from room to room. The 2 front rooms, so that's the ground floor living room and the first floor bedroom, retain the original proportions of the coach house, but everything beyond is new and sort of unashamedly modern. Circulation space is super compact, and again, this is just to maximize every useful square inch of the new 70 square meter house. And that's just some views showing, again, the connection with inside and out. So with the quite sort of earthy tones of the exposed brickwork and concrete, and then the connection with the sort of natural setting of the garden beyond, and the sort of interface between that is the oak. And this is carried up, so the bedroom above the kitchen, the same brick wall carries up and is exposed there. And again, this just complements the slightly more warm oak flooring in contrast to the sort of the gloss of the kitchen. And really the bedrooms, very sparse. The client wanted to avoid the use of colour but maximise storage. So there were built-in wardrobes in all the bedrooms, sockets and switches, very generous quantities, and the fitted joinery is again just very sort of monochrome. Recessed skirtings, again just to maximize area. Very discreet lighting, and we're just trying to achieve yeah, as I've said, a crisply detailed, clutter-free space. So that's the bedroom. So the key to getting light in, although this is the south-facing bedroom, was to introduce several roof lights. So the bedroom had 2, which are motorized, and again, these can be linked to a BMS to aid with ventilation if they're linked to sort of internal thermostats. That's just back to the detail. And then the stair also had 2 large motorized roof lights, but these were combined with an opening switch, which were part of the fire strategy. So the only reason we had permission from building control to have an open plan escape stair, which is the main stair, was because we had a mist system combined with these opening vents. So I'll just go back. So this is the staircase, which goes through the center of the plan. So you can just see the internal screen there, which looks down into the kitchen. That's the view back to the front door. And then this goes up to first floor level. And then that's the study, which is our second floor level. And this works quite effectively. So despite it being a north-facing window, this space always has light and is top lit, and that just pulls light through down. And there's, again, another internal screen to the shower, So there's natural daylight to every room in the house. And again, that's just a very, very compact stair. And the favorite space of the clients, which has become essential during lockdowns and post-pandemic, is the study, which the client had wanted all along, and it was going to be a library and home study space. But then it's since become the quintessential home office, which has been absolutely essential. And again, just very simple, some built-in worktop and shelf storage. And again, this is more integrated storage. That's a large sort of sail loft for ropes and climbing gear and camping stuff. Okay, so it's worth just speaking about what I've termed the environmental considerations. So really, with a house like this, it sits between two party walls. We're retaining the front facade, so it's really only a new roof and a new rear facade. So these were super insulated, timber floored, timber framed and sheathing throughout, brick clad at the rear, and the new windows, so slim light double glazed sash at the front, and then composite thermally efficient windows and bifold doors at the back. And the intention there was to obviously maximize the thermal efficiency and reduce energy use where possible. But then going beyond this, the roof lights and the fact they can be linked to a BMS or internal thermostat leaves the potential for a sort of passive heating and cooling strategy in the future. LED lights were low energy throughout. And again, the structure was optimized to the minimal thicknesses and depths, partly to do with material use, but also impact on party wall awards. That's just a view at night. And really a post sort of occupation appraisal was an interview with the client. And I mean, in summary, they're very pleased with it. They got a lot more than they bargained for. They originally just wanted a back extension, but we ended up demolishing 95% of their house. But then the gain is a sort of uplift of 20 square meters of their original house. And really the footprint and the spaces are tailored to them and their uses. So it's really, the way I see it, a bespoke, customized set of spaces, like a well-fitted suit. And it's just worth mentioning, obviously, the end result compared with the original building. There's a sort of 9-month process there, and really the unsung heroes are the makers and the site team. So I've prepared a short minute burst of images, which should hopefully summarize this process. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Well, what a fantastic project. That is hugely impressive. You can only begin to imagine the complexity of building something with a very narrow site, neighbours immediately adjacent on both sides, and having to take right of support from both neighbours. Hugely complex, but a very elegant design solution you've come up with there. So congratulations on that. I was interested to ask you just one or two questions. The decision not to put a basement, it looks like you originally, Jeremy, conceived of a basement in that, and it seems sensible. You know, you've got a small site, go down and add more space. What was the factor that stopped the client from doing it? Was it simply money, or was it too complicated?
Well, no, that's right. I mean, I think it was really the cost, sort of the benefit versus, you know, the sort of area gain. So really, yeah, the capital outlay. So there had to be a series of sketch options after that initial sort of concept sketch before we got to the right solution.
And given the constraints of the site, to what extent did the using maximising the use of available light really inform the design solution? Because you basically had the front, the back, and the top, and that was it. There was no chance of any light coming in from the sides in that serious, very narrow, tight plot.
No, exactly. So it was, yeah, really heavily driven by top lighting and daylighting through what were, you know, excessive numbers of roof lights, but it makes all the difference to the interior of the plan.
And making use of that space, the clever storage solutions, that was obviously hugely important to the client. Is that something that there's a typical theme of your work and of client brief?
Yeah, well, I think it's really locking into how they're going to use the spaces, who the clients, and then conceiving, things like storage. It could be other things like built-in furniture or circulation, but it's something that really reflects their character and their aspirations.
And you know, getting that third story, and were you always confident you'd sneak that in? I mean, how did you manage to get planning for that? Because you know, it's you've added an extra story on there without adding a great deal of height, cleverly.
Well, it was, yeah. I mean, that was a very close dialogue with the council, but as I say, they were on board because we got the dialogue going at an early stage, and they were very supportive.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. There'll be more Q&A later on, so keep your questions coming in. Remember to type your questions in, and do include your email so we can get back to you, just in case we don't have time to answer all of you. So now we're going to move on to Ben Cousins of Cousins and Cousins.
I'd like to talk to you today about the work we've been doing on the residential side of the business. And is just a very quick selection of a few of the projects we worked on over the years. And there's a mix of kind of cultural, commercial and residential projects here, but the main focus today will be on the residential work we've been doing, and how we approach projects and the brief formation with the clients, and how we arrive at the projects that we have, having discussed the requirements and aspirations of the projects and the buildings with each individual client. So as a practice, there's a few key words that we really like to come back to that we use, and they're really key themes for everything we do within the business. And we like to explore design around each of these key themes. And I think that really helps us articulate some of the ideas that we come up with, and certainly help clients understand what it is that we're driving at, and where the design ambition comes from. And so with the first one, craft, this is also, I forgot to say, symbolised by a nice object that I have actually here, and that's was given to me probably about 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, when I worked at Hopkins & Partners. And it typifies a number of things for us. A craft of how things are made, the beauty of an object like this, which I think you'll see in a lot of the details that we have within the practice. But also there's a cleverness to it. It looks like an impossible joint. It's one of those kind of impossible Japanese joints. And I'd like to think about how that's made, and we'll come back to that at the end. But also it's a nice metaphor for the practice. There's a different skill set between myself and Yellen, and my business partner wife, and she's very much on the creative side of things. I'm very much on the kind of the management side of the practice and the detailing side and the kind of making side of things. So this is a nice kind of metaphor for the difference between our relationships. It's kind of beautifully come together in this union here. So slightly cheesy, but I think it does symbolise quite a lot about the practice. So to do with craft, we like to make things, and we like to detail things in a particular way that has a rigour to it, and a beauty and an elegance, and there's a number of different ways of doing this, but it's about kind of simplifying material choices and understanding how things are made and how they're going together, how things are constructed. So I think that's really key to the kind of understanding the kind of the essence of some of the buildings we make and the detail of that, which is really critical. But it is about making ultimately. The next word and theme is detail, and architects do like a good detail, and no more so than in our practice. And the image on the left, I think, is a good example of how one achieves a level of rigour and detail to get everything to line up exactly with the adjacent materials. So here we have a boardmark concrete wall, an full height oak door, a very crisp shadow gap line which comes through to the roof light above, and everything's millimetre perfect. So to achieve that level of precision and detail takes an awful lot of skill, not only in terms of how one draws that, but also having a contractor that understands and interprets the requirements of the architect's vision, and ultimately the vision of the client as well, because we're designing homes for people, and that's really important that we're articulating that vision and taking the clients on a journey through the design and the process of trying to discover what's important for them within the building, and us being able to articulate that in an elegant and meaningful way. There's a couple of staircases that we've done on projects recently. We do love a good staircase, and the one on the left is an elegant solution to arriving at a staircase where we have a folded, welded metal substrate, which is then clad in oak, and structurally the balustrade is working with the metal that's hidden within the stair to support the actual stair, and is becoming integral to the design. The staircase on the right is a replacement of a traditional Victorian staircase in a house in Hackney, and this really, by putting this featured staircase in, really unlocked all the plan forms, so we were able to articulate the stair really well within this context, and that enabled each of the rooms to unfold from the central stair ribbon that runs through the house. This particular finish is a metal patinated steel staircase, again a structural stringer. This is a project we did in Highgate. We have boardmark concrete walls either side which are acting structurally and allows the void to be pushed through the centre of the house, and bridge links to connect between the two spaces either side of the building. And there's a lovely view through to the garden at the rear. Same projects and more detailing around the kind of simplicity of material choices here. We have the travertine on the right, boardmark concrete, polished plaster ceiling and oak floors. On the left-hand side, again, the full height doors that you saw from an earlier image against the boardmark concrete wall. And interestingly, we have a hidden fire curtain that's located in this joint and groove here in the ceiling, which would enable the space to be closed off in the event the fire alarm should go off, which then allows us to open up the space and have lots of double height voids, again, kind of bringing light in. So you know, the detailing of all of this is really important and has to be considered right from the outset of the project. This is a view looking the other way of the bridge link running over between the two boardmark concrete structure walls. Design, obviously, a fundamental key aspect of all the work we do. Consideration of design from the outset, how one achieves a elegant solution in a minimal pared back structural solution. In this case here, we're looking at a project in Hackney with that fixture stair that we mentioned a moment ago, using glulam timber as a structural element, and also acting thermally to separate the inside and the outside of the property. We considered other aspects of material choices here, but timber had the most slender to weight ratio that we could find. So it was something that actually worked very well in the end. If it were to be a steel structure, it would be much thicker because you don't have to insulate it, you have to fire rate it, you have to clad it. So the simplicity and the elegance of the timber frame here, I think, really helps to create something quite special. This is a project in Highgate, and this is at the back of the house, where we have got something incredibly modern on the back, but it's very much more traditional on the front, which is respecting the kind of typology of the local street scene that you can see through in the distance here. It's very much a kind of traditional arts and crafts area, but because it's private views to the rear, enables you to do something much more interesting to the back. So, you know, we're not ever hindered by the limitations of an area. There's often requirements for complying with planning regulations, etc. But I think if one understands the what can be achieved within the planning system, you can create fantastic results. This is a conservation area, and has some quite important views to the rear which needs to be considered, but it doesn't prevent one from producing some quite interesting architecture. This is a section through the same house. You can see the boardmark concrete wall running through the property, the cantilevered staircase, the light fill dormer at the front that brings light right the way through the building here, and the triple height voids at the back, which also takes you down to the basement level. Another project in Islington, this is a Grade 2 listed house that had been extensively altered over the years, and we dug a basement to the rear garden, and then connected that basement through to the low ground floor with a new feature staircase that sat between the low ground floor and the upper ground floor, and then created a void through to let light into the depths of the low ground floor. And because the building was extensively altered, it enabled us to do these interventions, even though it is a Grade 2 listed property. So this is a reworking of a motorcycle factory in Lewisham, and which is hard up against a train track on the right hand side. And we tried to create something very simple and as a diagram, very elegant solution, which is having a defensive concrete wall to the right hand side here, which separates the owners of the house, the users of the house, from the railway track. So both act structurally, as you'll see in a moment, because this is a 3-story wall, but also acoustically and visually defensive away from the railway track. So we're trying to turn our back on the railway track, and also creates a zone for the circulation through the middle up against the side of the concrete wall, and then all the living accommodation of bedrooms to the left hand side here. And you can see that in effect on the right, on the image on the right, and we have the wall, the concrete wall with the staircase cantilevered from that, all the bedroom accommodation on the upper levels accessed through these bridge links up to the side here, and then a large skylight above, which brings light right into the depth of the plan. And this is a view from the garden looking back the other way towards the entrance. This is another Grade 2 listed house in West London, putting in a basement underneath the rear garden with a new extension to the rear. The extension to the rear had to be very sensitively done, given the nature of the listed building. There's a lot of original features left of this original building, so opening up of the rear of the property was quite a challenge. You can see here that we've maintained the opening through to line up with existing windows above, and created a lightweight, elegant glazed solution to the rear as an extension. And then there's a floor light as well, which brings light down into the basement. Now light, that is another theme, and another really important word for us. I've mentioned light a number of times, and describing the work that we do, particularly in this country, I think it's really important to try and maximise the amount of light that we bring in, but also light plays another really important role, which is to connect the user from the inside out. So we're trying to reconnect the exterior and the interior together, so that the garden becomes an extension of the inside of the house. By bringing the light in, we know that it enhances well-being. We know that connecting with nature is a really important aspect of creating architecture for one's well-being. So it's really important that we consider light as a theme and as a word in everything we do from the outset of the project. So this is another project in Hackney, and a very simple move to create a glass corner, which enabled the placement of the dining room to have maximum connectivity to the garden. And I think it was very successful in this way and created quite a visually interesting building at the same time. This is the project in Hackney, not too far actually around the corner from the project we just mentioned, with the feature staircase, the connection with the garden, this is a view from the front door looking through, and the view on the left-hand side looking up through the glass roof, again bringing as much lighting as you can to the back of the property. This is a northeast facing property, so actually we don't have that much direct sunlight at the rear. So this project in North London, where we dug a basement underneath the existing building, and we've connected to the rear garden via a courtyard. This is about bringing lighting to the lower ground floor, so that these lower ground floors, or the basements, feel at the very worst like a lower ground floor and don't feel like they're a basement at all. They're very much connected to the rest of the property and to the outside. The connection here to the light well externally is a key factor in the success of this space. A couple of other projects we finished a few years ago now. The one on the right shows how one might connect to the basement level from the upper level, visually connecting through to that basement, creating a very large light well that takes you through to that part of the house. And on the left-hand side, just a really simple move to create a ribbon roof light on the back extension. So well-being is a very topical subject at the moment, and it's something that we're all grappling with, particularly with working from home, and the need to ensure that one's own particular environment in the house is designed sufficiently well that there's a sense of calm and well-being within these spaces. We'll talk about a project in a little bit, of which this is a slide about. This is a Victorian house in Islington, and it looks like any other Victorian house that's been refurbished. But there's a trick to this particular project, where we stripped everything back from the inside of the house and exposed all of the brickwork, and then rebuilt it to almost passive house standard. So it performs unbelievably well environmentally, but also with that there's a added benefit of a calmness, and we've got purified air within the building. So we've introduced an Mvhr, mechanical heat ventilation system, and that filters all the air. So each of the rooms has a ventilation system, and it has a serenity to it and a calmness, which the clients report back to us is really enhancing their well-being. So it was a nice slide to put in, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a few minutes. This is a project where we've got a study with a connection to the garden, and I think simply having that connection through to the outside is really key. This has actually got the shutters on the outside, which are in the half-closed position, but once they're open, you get a really lovely view through to the garden. So any connection with nature really helps the sense of well-being. Again, that project with the garden on the table, looking through to the garden, it really feels like you are dining outside when sat in this room. Home offices are really important aspects of the work we do as well. Understanding the client's needs for their home working is becoming really much more important, and we're finding that pretty much every single job, where before we might have a small study area, now clients are demanding dedicated study rooms, work from home rooms, and that's a really important part of what we do as well at the moment. A view, this is that Highgate project, with an amazing view to the garden. What a place, what a luxury to be able to bathe in that tub. This is about creating the appropriate view from this particular setting. This wouldn't work obviously in a lot of other places where you have neighbours overlooking you, but in this particular context it seemed entirely appropriate to create this extraordinary bathroom experience. Sustainability, Going back to the Hackney project, we mentioned a few minutes ago about using timber as much as possible. The choice of timber was not only structural, but also because of its sustainable properties. And where we can, we will always try to think about sustainability at the outset of the project and consider those aspects to each of the refurbishments that we do. The Islington house we mentioned a moment ago, again, this is trying to achieve a near passive house standard. So it's an incredibly sustainable project in terms of its operational carbon use. It's the energy consumption of this building is negligible. There's a residential refurb standard called Benefit, which is kind of a notch down from passive house, and it requires you to improve the thermal performance of the property to create a thermal wrap on the inside and then introduce mechanical ventilation systems within that. So by creating this kind of super insulated, thermally sealed box, you have zero air leakages at all throughout the building, and it performs incredibly well. One of the problems with the majority of Victorian, particularly Victorian and Georgian building stock in the UK, is that it's very leaky. And we're doing exactly the same thing on a project in Ealing at the moment. It's another photo of the Hackney project, the two-storey room extension. This is the Islington house front elevation and some of the detailing through the joinery with a series of rooms that we've created through the house. This is a section diagram through that particular house as well in Islington. You can see the thermal wrap in yellow around the building, and this is the Mvhr heat recovery system, and you can see the air in is exchanged with the exhaust air out, and that is then filtered through the project, through the property. And there's a continuous air tightness layer around the perimeter of the building as well. So it's incredibly efficient and energy efficient building that has this incredible feeling of well-being once inside, with the calmness that's created through the interventions we've put in. And we're also applying this to another project in Ealing at the moment, and this is about to go on site. And again, we're upgrading this to an Benefit standard, and this particular client is actually taking this to the next level, where they are looking at lots of aspects of well-being within the project, within the house. So removing noxious gases, VOCs from paints, formaldehyde-free MDF, not using any phenolic foam insulation, replacing with cork, trying to go for environmentally sustainable concrete. They are trying to consider everything as they can within these properties, and it is evidence and proof that we can do this within these projects. And I think if you're considering a project that goes right way back to the bare bones of the house, and we're taking the structure right back to the brickwork, the extra over cost of putting these additional features in isn't that much more, given the extent of refurb that would have to be undertaken in any case. So that's my last slide. And just to go back to my object, if anyone was wondering how it was made, it's on the diagonal. So it's quite a simple joint when you look at it in context like this, but actually it's a very elegant solution when it's put together. And I think that's an interesting item to finish the talk on. So thank you very much, and I'll hand you back.
Ben, congratulations on an outstanding portfolio of work there. The stairs are a particular star of the show of many of your houses. Is that a particular theme that you bring out in lots of your projects, and that some beautiful staircases?
Yeah, we had a project the other day where a client came to us asking for a new staircase, and the house evolved around the staircase. So it was something which was quite interesting. So it was something can start from something quite small, but we do love a staircase, it's true. And there's something very sculptural about them, and very simple to connect different levels, and doing it in a very elegant way it's always an interesting challenge.
Yeah, very much sculptural staircases in your work. It's a lovely theme, and some outstanding examples there. Energy efficiency was another theme that's come across very strongly in your projects. Now, is that driven by you, or are you finding that's driven by the clients?
I think a bit of both, actually. Certainly more recently, in the last few years, we're seeing clients requiring it from the outset of the job, and often the projects won't lend themselves to too much environmental upgrades because of the cost of doing it, particularly on existing retrofits. So I think if someone who was considering a lighter refurb, it probably isn't worth considering the extent of the kind of the benefit level of upgrade that we've been putting in on a couple of projects. But there are things that can be done in easy solutions, easy wins, like replacing windows with double glazing, sensitively done, double glazed sash windows, for instance, putting as much insulation into the build as possible. But you can take it to the next level. You can strip everything out. You can try to put the thermal wrap on the inside. You can introduce Mvhr heat recovery systems. You can put solar panels on. You can think about air source heat pumps rather than boilers. So there are kind of degrees of change that can be put into these properties.
I was particularly impressed by the idea of building a house right next to a railway, but managing to keep the sound of the railway out by turning your back on the house. But ventilation, for instance, must have been a real challenge. How do you create the ventilation needed in a house, but keep the train noise out?
Well, that would have a Mvhr, so that has to be mechanically ventilated. So we need to try to insulate thermally, but also insulate for noise as well. So introducing a big, heavy, thick mass of a concrete wall is going to provide a lot of resistance to noise from the railway lines. I mean, the vibration is something that's very tricky to deal with. And however hard you try to do to mitigate vibration of something like next to the railway line, that's a particular challenge. But certainly in that project, we were looking at a very heavy mass of a building, insulating as much as possible, putting double glazing in, and mechanical heat ventilation system as well. So it can be done. I mean, the diagram of that house kind of it drew itself with this long axis down one side and the kind of retaining wall to one side against the railway line, the kind of defensive line against the noise and the visual side of things to the railway line. It was a joy to work on that project.
And glulam will be a material that's new to many people watching this, I suspect. It's a very beautiful product. What is its lifespan, and how do you maintain it? How does it age?
So particular projects in Hackney, we looked at all of those considerations. It does age, and it will turn, in the UK, it does go a kind of a greyish colour, and it does need to be maintained. And I think we need to consider that and how it's used in various projects, because it also has a bit of a bad reputation for going a bit darker than grey. So we just need to think about that in particular cases. Its lifespan, I mean, I have to say I don't entirely know, but it's long. It will outlive and outperform many of the other materials that we put on that project, because they come with a limited warranty of longevity for these products. But I think timber will be there for a lot longer. That also was interesting about that particular project in Hackney. It acted thermally and structurally. So, we didn't need any additional insulation on the inside, and we did a dew point calculation to ensure that we weren't going to get any condensation on the inside of the timber. So it was a very elegant solution.
Ben, thank you very much. Now, I'm sure you all have questions for Ben too, so please keep those questions coming in. Include your email address, please, so we can get back to you if we don't have a chance to answer everybody. Our final presentation is from Matthew Giles of Matthew Giles Architects.
I thought we'd start with our project at Wakehurst Road, which is in South London. It's a conversion and extension of a traditional Victorian terraced house, which for many architects is the bane of their lives, but we still enjoy doing them, I suppose. And each time we do them, we try to, maybe not make them necessarily different to another house that we might have worked on, but we try new ideas and different techniques, different detailing, different use of materials, that sort of thing. With this particular job, our client had a very simple brief. It's, a certain number of bedrooms and bathrooms. They were a young family. But the main kind of architectural involvement was to dig out a basement underneath the house completely, and to extend and reorganize the main ground floor. So we opened it up and we introduced, in the side return area, we put in a sort of almost like a double height vaulted a ceiling with glazing at the end overlooking the garden. There was quite a significant level change between the front half of the ground floor and the rear half, and we wanted to sort of enhance that by adding to the height of the side. So that's hence the vaulting. You can see my colleague Tom there in the distance. Moving to the outside, we looked to clad the building in corten steel, which we think sort of sits quite nicely with the London stock brick. And as part of the job, actually, we did a loft as well. So up at the top there, you can see a corten clad sort of loft dormer structure. The materials used through the ground floor were polished concrete, corten again, cast in situ concrete for some of those structural elements, and timber. As just a detail here of the glazing at the rear, which is wrapped in corten. The glazing's concertina doors, standard stuff, straightforward to use, by Schüco, these doors, I think. And then here's a detail of part of the interior where you can see that combination of concrete on the floor and in the structural column that I mentioned before, which is kind of faceted in this job. And the contractor did a beautiful job of it, I have to say. Very good builder on that job. And then we have timber, some handrail details as well, and you can see a bit of brick. And I think the whole marriage of materials works well. Well, at least we think so. And finally, I think it's finally for this job anyway, we've got an image which is a sort of detail showing a part of the corten steel and a chimney beyond. Moving on to the next project, it's another Victorian house, but it's a slightly different arrangement. I've got a section that I'll show you in a moment, which helps perhaps explain this, because this building was a little different to the typical Victorian terrace. It was a semi-detached house for a start, and it's a little bit older. It had more width to it, and our client had, and it had a sort of decent sized garden, but it also had an existing sort of rear addition, which was really, it added square feet, but it didn't improve the house at all. It was kind of hopeless, really. It didn't provide any decent link to the garden. It made no sense with the existing building. So we basically took it down, and we sort of rebuilt the shape of it, because for planning reasons, you know, that's kind of what we were allowed to do. But we completely reformed the interior. And if I just go to the section now, this hopefully helps explain part of it, where the sort of glazed angled roof is. There was a floor going through here, and that formed part of the outrigger. But we decided to cut the floor out completely, and that helped provide a sort of double height space, basically, and which created a decent link from the main house to the garden. It also created quite a dramatic space, and it enabled us to link the main building with the lower ground sort of addition and the extended basement, because the original basement was there, but we just made it a bit deeper, so it's a bit more usable, and longer to give our client a bit more space. And there's a view there showing the view from the original upper ground floor living room through the glazed infill space to the garden beyond, and also you can see part of the dining and kitchen area there as well. We always try to bring sort of, I mean, natural light obviously is essential, but views are so important too. So we try to think about, what do you see as you walk through a building? You know, whether you see into one room, what do you see beyond that? Maybe you see through that room to a window, or to the outside, to hopefully see some trees or sky. We're always conscious of that sort of thing. It's about views and organisation of spaces. This is a view, same project, looking from the lower level. So we're sort of underneath that almost balcony that we were on before. And you can see the staircase coming down from above to the right, kitchen to the left, and the garden beyond. And again, talking about those views of the outside, we introduced a sort of wide, clear story window here. And you can see the trees outside. I think it makes it quite a nice space, really. Next image is, again, this hopefully helps explain it a little bit. So you can kind of see the balcony up there, and then the staircase coming down underneath the glazed roof. The main house, or the original house, is to the right, and the garden's to the left. And that's the outside. So the kind of brick box that you can see at first floor level, I'm just going to show you with my cursor there. That was the sort of outline of the building that had been added to the original building that we inherited. And so although we rebuilt it, it was built to the same size and shape as the original. But what we did was to, as I tried to explain before, I don't know how successfully I explained it, we sort of excavated beneath that block and brought that space into the lower ground floor. So rather than have a sort of tunnel-like lower ground floor, we like to think we created a space that has sort of drama and height and airiness and volume and views and all those sorts of things. Moving on to the next project. Okay, this is another Victorian house. And obviously we work in London. Most of our work involves remodeling existing buildings, and a lot of those are Victorian, although we do other types of work. In this particular project, again, we did the whole building, but the focus of today's discussion is about the sort of additions, so the extensions on the ground floor particularly. And it was a wide building and on a wide-ish plot for a Victorian house, and it had a wide sort of passage, which, I mean, this bit we're looking through. This is looking through from the living room through to towards the back garden, and there was a sort of, this was part of the garden when we first met our clients. It was underutilized, so our client wanted to kind of improve the rear of the house, improve the access to the garden. They had a severely disabled son who needed to be able to get around the house too. So we had to take all those sort of factors into consideration. But what we were concerned about was if we were just to sort of add, a rear extension with a kitchen and a dining area and maybe a seating area into the building, then it was going to make the original part of the building dark, difficult to use unless we thought carefully about it. So what we tried to do was to almost introduce or keep the garden, as it were, in the view from the main house looking through the building. And we did that by introducing, glazing really, and a sort of courtyard. This is actually external space, I don't know if you can see from my cursor there. And this, it's just been planted when this photograph was taken, which is a year or so ago now, maybe a little bit longer. But I like to think, I haven't been back there for a while, but I like to think it's nicely sort of matured. So we have some greenery in this space, but you can also see through to the trees beyond, in the end of the garden, or maybe they're in the neighbour's garden. And again, it's in a similar way to the previous project. We're always trying to think about how do we see, how do we kind of, what do we see from the main building, especially if we're adding to it. Okay, next image this is the plan. So the main part of the house is on the right. And what we did was, the main sitting room stays pretty much as it always had been. We introduced a loo and a laundry space and also a lift for the son. But at the rear, we designed a kind of addition that housed this courtyard idea that I mentioned before. I'll just show you that with my cursor, sort of this area here. On the angles so that you could see the kind of glimpses of green. That was the idea from the main living rooms at the front. And then those angles of the courtyard went on to inform the sort of shape of the rear, which also helped create spaces for, eating outside, slightly enclosed sort of, or, spaces that had, that were sort of sheltered in a way. And maybe there's a bit more privacy. As well as making for quite an interesting looking building from the exterior. So this is another view of the interior. We're sort of, I'll just flick back actually. We're kind of standing, where are we standing? We're standing over here by the dining table in that view, looking towards the kitchen. But you also can see the kind of outside kind of spaces. Obviously you've got glazing in between. Again, I think this was done by Schüco actually. And then we've got glazing in the roof and that sort of thing to bring natural light into the kitchen spaces. Because of course, when you build out, across the back of a building, you potentially reduce the amount, or you do reduce the amount of light coming into the middle of the building. So we always have to consider that quite carefully. And this is looking back towards the sitting room and the front of the house. And then there's that angled courtyard again. Again, I'd like to imagine these plants have matured a little bit, so we see a bit more greenery. But this was taken just after the project was finished and the client had just moved in. And there's a view of the rear. We used cast in situ concrete, and the interesting thing about using concrete is the shapes that you can make. And we wanted to have something that, with those angles, we felt actually, because the driver of the scheme was the angles to the courtyard that I mentioned before, and this sort of led and helped to inform the kind of shape of the main part of the rear of the building. And in order to give us those angles and shapes, of course, there are different materials we could use. We were quite keen to try using concrete because we thought it would give us the opportunity to sort of create almost more sort of slightly more sculpted elements, hopefully in a kind of semi-seamless way, although obviously there are some seams. Anyway, that's what we use there, cast in situ. Most of the projects we work on, we have excellent builders, and on this job, I would just say they were harder to work with, but we got through it. And there's a sort of close-up of part of the concrete, and I mean, it's a lovely material, and you create nice textures with it, and it's all about the formwork really. So we were very careful about what the type of formwork we use, how we set it out, because that all has to be, if that's done well, then you're going to get a good result. The last project I'm going to talk to you about is a smaller project for us. Yeah, we were asked to design a garden room for our client, and although this project was finished, I think it's about 2 years ago, because this was photographed in the summer of 2019, I think, and of course, since then, it's become so topical to have garden rooms and spaces that people can actually, work from quite often, or certainly send their children to, that sort of thing, or use as a guest room. I mean, they're multifunctional, really. Our client had a great garden. You can sort of see it there. It's a beautiful place. And it was one of those gardens that backs on to several gardens. So in a way, it felt a little bit like you were in a kind of park. But we designed this small but quite contemporary building in a way. It's very rectilinear. It's got a little bit of glazing in there, and but also we clad it using timber, and we used a timber detail where we attach very simple kind of timber ribs really to a kind of ply backing. It's all waterproofed, and then we stained the timber that sort of silvery grey colour. And the idea was that it's sort of, although obviously you can see it, we like to think it sort of blends a little bit into the background. It sort of nestles into the garden, and it doesn't jump out too much, which is why we didn't sort of fully glaze it really. We wanted to kind of soften it a little bit, and that's the idea with the timber. That's part of the interior. There was a bar in there, that's a bar there, but a sort of kitchen bar. Our client was a chef actually at one time, and so he still enjoys cooking and entertaining and all that type of thing. So we clad the interior of the building. It was quite a low budget building actually. It wasn't super expensive. It's about 600 square feet internally, so it's a healthy size for a garden room. And we clad the interior of the building in birch ply, which is a lovely material to use. It's kind of warm, and so in the winter, the idea was that in the summer, of course, these buildings are kind of lovely because the doors are open, and warm air outside, and they're pleasant places to be, and the gardens surrounded by greenery, hopefully. But in the winter, it's very easy to sort of forget that building can just become a dank kind of space at the end of the garden that no one wants to go into. And we were keen to avoid that. So it's heated properly. We've got underfloor heating in that building. We've got a very simple floor going through. It's a marmoleum, which is almost like a lino type floor, with the birch ply cabinetry for the kitcheny bar area. And also we clad the walls of the building internally in birch ply too, which maybe you can just make out on the sort of sides there. And then dead ahead there is a mirrored, it's a sort of mirrored detail with a roof light above it, and it kind of reflects the garden, which is actually behind the photographer there, if that makes sense. And then finally, we've got a shot of this same building from higher up, and you can sort of see it in the landscape, really. So that's from further up in our client's house, and there's the building sitting in the garden. It's got a green roof. We use green roofs more and more now. They're very simple to install, and as long as they're looked after, they're not high maintenance, but they need a little bit of care. They're very nice things. They're very successful, and I think they improve the outlook, especially if you're adding to a main building, or in this case, adding a building at, sort of towards the end of the garden. The idea is it's not an ugly thing to look at from above. Hopefully, it looks a little bit like it's sort of buried in the garden. That was the idea, and that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Matt, thank you very much indeed for sharing those projects with us. Once again, some hugely inspirational work there. Some quite complex projects. How do how important in the team is the contractor, and how do you find the right contractor to bring on board?
That's a good question. The contractor is basically essential to a project, any of our projects. Really, we work hard to make sure that our ideas are understood by the contractor, and we have a lot of dialogue with them. We have regular meetings. We like to think we produce good quality drawings to help them understand. And then, I can answer selecting a builder, but perhaps later on, if that's better, because it goes on for a while, you see. I'm a bit worried about that.
And equally important in the team is the engineer, now often the unsung hero. I noticed in some of your projects there's some very clever, intricate, delicate engineering. Once again, how important is it to get the right engineer, and how do you get the engineer to be willing to take on the risk? So particularly that gable that looked like it was almost suspended in that project with the glazed roof looked beautifully delicate, but it must have been quite a feat for the engineer to pull off.
Yes. Well,
or is it all magic?
It's not magic, no. It is. There's a lot of thought and work and effort and time that goes into it. We work closely. We work with a number of different engineers, and we kind of work pretty closely with them. Any engineer that we would recommend for one of our projects to our clients is someone we've probably worked with before and have had a good experience of working with. But we're also keen to meet new engineers when I think about it. But it's a bit like working with the contractor. It is a team effort. I once got accused of being naive when I said the whole building project thing is a team effort, but I still believe that it is. So I think if you've got a good builder, a good engineer, a good architect, and a good client, you're going to get a good result. I think that if one of those things, fails, then you're going to find it harder. If two of them do, then you're really going to struggle.
And to what extent would you throw, into that mix the supplier as well? Because I noticed, you've done a lot of frameless glass work, making sure that supplier is reliable and part of that team. Because if that bit's wrong, especially on when you got the glazed link, like on that project you showed us, I presume that was one of the last things to go in.
Well, with glazing particularly, you do have to be very careful about the supplier, very careful. But again, I don't know about the other guys who've been, you've been talking to, but we quite often use, builders or subcontractors, specialists, particularly glazing specialists that we worked with before. So we're able to actually discuss our ideas with them, at the beginning of the project, or certainly quite early on, to make sure that what we're talking about doing is feasible. And, with time and experience, you come to learn yourself what's really doable and what isn't. And in a similar way to structural engineering, to a point, I think you get better at it. I like to think anyway, as you get older and more experienced. So, but it's absolutely essential to get good suppliers, good contractors, good engineers, and good architects.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. So let's open up the Q&A now and welcome back Ben Cousins, Jeremy Foster, and Schüco's architectural project manager, Jordan Vincent. Hi, everybody. We're all together now. So we're going to move on to a few questions. I'm going to start by exploring that all-important relationship between architect and customer. When we surveyed homeowners who had commissioned major renovation projects, we found that the majority engaged with the building contractor first rather than an architect. What benefits do you think having an architect in the team first actually has in terms of bringing out the benefits and maximising the potential, if you like, of a building? I'm going to start with Jeremy.
Thank you. What are the benefits with speaking to an architect first? Well, I guess we're kind of in a peculiar position. We sort of have an overview of the whole process, and we can see the art of the possible from the outset. And then, if we're getting on a bit and a bit more experience, then we've had a few projects under our belt, so we've seen how the result turns out. So the sort of pitfalls along the way. So yeah, I guess we're really qualified to advise at an early stage the alternative routes, and as Matt says, the right contractor can make the project or break it. So right at the outset, you've got to sort of pitch the vision and say, this is the route, this is the journey, and you can take the hard road, or we can do it together and overcome the kind of trials and end up with something beautiful.
Ben, do you find that's the case, that people wanting an extension, they start by talking to a builder when they're available, what can they do and so on, rather than necessarily bringing the architect in at the outset and then come back around full circle? And does that get in the way sometimes?
I think we've had a number of jobs from contractors and builders, and I think it's quite helpful for clients to speak to a builder first. But I think they generally can only provide so much advice, and they're often then referring work to architects. And as I say, we get quite a lot of work that way. We've got very good relationships with all the builders we have and we work with. So we feed each other work, and we'll only work with builders that we've worked with before, generally speaking, and we've got a really trusted relationship with. So I think whilst it's helpful, I don't think it provides the full story, and I completely agree with what Jeremy said. I think it's we have an overview. We're kind of like GPs of the world. We understand everything, but maybe not the absolute finite detail of every section of the work we do. But we have to have an overview of everything. So and we can definitely provide information on creating best value and creating great design and looking at all the different aspects that's required to construct a project. So I think contractors, whilst yes, it's really helpful getting a view from a contractor, they'll only have it from one particular viewpoint. And until the engineers design the foundations or the steel work and we come up with a concept for the design overall, you're not really going to get the full picture. So contractors will only provide a limited amount of information, I think.
I expect one of the questions, Matt, that people are asking contractors is, we want an extension at the back, 2 stories. What do you reckon it's going to cost? And is that the place to start, so you can at least get the measure of what you might be able to afford?
I think it is a good place to start, actually. I don't know what the other guys think, but I mean, we always start off by, well, we meet a potential client. We visit them at the site, at the property, or at the plot they've bought or whatever. And although we don't start talking about money immediately, we tend to talk about the process, the stages of work that we need to go through, how you get the thing built, and what's involved. But then from that discussion, we go away and we put together what we call an outline budget. So we start off with something, because I do think it's important for a client to have an indication early on as to what they're likely to be in for. Then they can make the decision themselves as to whether it's something they want to progress or not. And if they do want to progress it, is the budget about right, or is it is it too high? And you can have those discussions at the beginning rather than a little bit further down the line, which maybe can be a bit more difficult.
So we're going to move on to your questions now. Please keep those questions coming in. Lots of people have put forward questions. Remember, just type it in. Do include your email address so we can get back to you. Starting now with the technical one for Jordan. We have a low level threshold for our glazing. How do you measure weather performance, and what will your system the Schüco sliding system particularly achieve? So I think we know that sliding doors and weatherproofing, and certainly folding sliding doors and weatherproofing, can be a real challenge. How do you overcome it?
Absolutely. Oh, thanks, Michael, for the question. It's actually quite an interesting one, because we have so many Schüco sliding systems now on the market, and really it varies between system to system. So looking at some of my notes here, realistically, we're anywhere from 3A all the way up to 9A, which is equivalent to about 600 pascals.
So moving on to another technical question, in fact, when somebody's asked about what experience you have of automated solutions for windows, roof lights and sliders. Now, I've seen automated roof lights. I'm not sure I've ever seen automated windows and sliders other than in cars.
Well, it's funny you actually mentioned that. Yeah, we do. We have automated open out windows, as well as open in, tilt in and side hung, as well as our new ASE 60 Tiptronic, which is our automated slider.
I guess that's the beginning of having central locking for the house. If you can press a button and set the alarm, but it also then closes the doors, closes the windows, and it seems like a good idea. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. Another question. This one's going to be, I think everybody's going to have probably faced this one. Somebody's written in and asked, how do people manage to get so much glazing in their extensions? Aren't there limitations on what you can achieve with the building regulation for energy efficiency? So, well, I might start with Ben this time and move around in a different order.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The building regulations would limit you to a certain amount of glazing if you were to follow the elemental method of calculation. But that's only one method of calculation within the building regulations. So to achieve more than that, you have to consider the whole building, and you have to offset an amount of heat loss through the glazing with extra insulation in other parts of the building. So we always consider the building as a whole, particularly where there's a lot of glass involved, and we know that we're going to face the same kind of problems time in, time out. And also, I think engaging with a building control approved inspector company at a very early stage in the process is a really key thing as well. Whilst the local authority building control services have their place and they can be very useful, I think it's quite nice to be able to have a consultant on board from the outset of the project, like you might a structural engineer or quantity surveyor, who can inform the design process and engage with them with at concept stage with your design, and to say, this is what we've got, these are the limitations, we know we're going to face in building regulations, how do we deal with this? And they'll come up with a solution, we can work together, and we often have to do a SAP calculation for the entire building to prove the amount of glass within it. But so yeah, early engagement with a approved inspector we find is key in this process.
And presumably Jordan, working closely in conjunction with whoever's going to be supplying glazing and glazing units is super important, and the thermal performance of those units. I mean, I suppose you've got to take that the performance of those units into that offset equation.
That's right. Yeah,
definitely.
Matt, anything to add to that? I mean, you've designed, again, your projects have lots of glazing in there. Are you using triple glazed units or particularly thermally efficient glass, low E glass?
We certainly use low E glass. I mean, we have used triple glazing every now and then, not particularly often, but it's very. It basically improves the thermal efficiency of the building. And at the end of the day, although yes, we may introduce quite a lot of glazing, we are still improving the overall sort of efficiency thermally of that building. And as I think, well, basically, I don't think I've got much else to add to what Ben said about that.
So a question in from Andy. He's got a 1930s 3-bed semi. They're removing the current extension and rebuilding a full width, a full 6 meters, giving them an extra 34 square meters of rear glazing plus roof light. They're changing from gas boiler to air source heat pump. Is it economic, given only extension is insulated, or would we have to upgrade areas of the existing house? So I think this is actually going back to that question about having a large area of glazing. Can you actually add insulation to the existing house to offset having a larger area of glazing in your extension? I'm going to aim that one at Ben.
Thanks. Yeah, I think with everything, you have to consider a fabric first approach. So if there's an opportunity to upgrade the thermal performance of the house overall, your air source heat pump isn't going to work as hard. So you're going to get more efficiencies out of that unit. So I think if you were to consider the fabric first approach overall, you're going to get a much better benefit from that. But if you can't do that, it will still perform, but you might need to also have a small boiler to offset the inefficiencies of the overall building. But you'll need to engage with a services engineer to really help assess the ins and outs of that particular installation.
Jeremy, anything else you can do to try and increase the area of glazing? Any other ways you can, I suppose, reduce the carbon footprint of the house to be able to offset more glass in your extension or other improvements?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on the orientation, but if there are sort of passive shading systems, or you can increase the performance of the coatings or the U value of the glass itself. As Ben says, there's a sort of holistic, probably SAP calculation where you're kind of adjusting the sliders and increasing it in one area, boosting thermal mass here to improve glazing and transparency there. So it's a sort of trade-off, but a dynamic process, really.
Jordan, is the solution to go to triple glazing and sort of super performance glazing, or is it not always the right answer?
I'd agree with that. It's not always the right answer, I would say. It depends on the envelope of the building, really. I think it's got to be looked at as a more holistic view, combining the two together, for sure.
Okay, we are getting lots of questions in, but do please keep on sending them. And remember your email address so we can answer you later on. Simple question here. I'm going to aim this one back at Jeremy. How can you bring more light to create a bright and airy space in a shut-off north-facing room? We've all got that little north-facing room, I think most of us have. Is there anything you can do? Because you've not got a huge amount of natural daylight to start with. Do you just make it a storage cupboard? Or is there a way? If it's your living room, you can't do that. So, how do you bring in light from the north? Is there anything you can do?
Well, I guess it's exploring options. If there are routes through from above, you'll get, it's a better quality of light. Top lighting, daylighting is going to be, improve the space massively. If you can sort of sluice through to other spaces and borrow light, but then you run into, if it's a common area, you're going to run into sort of fire ratings, and it's a different kind of glass and it's more expensive, and actually the quality of light through it. So it's whether that's worth it. And then things like walk-on roof lights, walk-on floor lights, in internal spaces can just, again, help the passage of light through these deeper spaces. Because the fall off from an external... Yeah, exactly. But the fall off from an external window, especially north-facing, is quite dramatic.
We're getting so many questions in. I'm just going to move on and sort of rotate, basically. So, Ben, one for you. Quite an open-ended question, actually. Probably almost more aimed at an engineer. But Carla's asking, what kind of reinforcement would be needed to introduce and extend a existing window? I think she means basically taking out a window and putting in a lot more glass. What do you need to do structurally?
Speak to an engineer, absolutely, but not before you've spoken to the architect who will help you come up with a concept. If you're enlarging an opening, you may well need to install a beam or a lintel above it so that you're transferring the load from the wall or roof above to the ground level. But there are innovative ways of doing this, and you can make them quite slender. But so it's a difficult question to answer without seeing the detail of it. But you'd certainly need to engage with an engineer on that.
Second part of the question, and probably a similar answer. If you're replacing with another big window rather than with sliding or folding sliding doors, do you still have to put a steel in, or will the window frame itself provide the structural support that you need in creating a larger opening?
Not normally. The windows are normally requiring to be inserted into a structural opening that's self-supporting. And
the third part of the question, trying to interpret, it's opening a walkway where there was a window. Would there need to be a new steel? I think we're talking about a walkway, meaning a doorway. So I think we've broadly covered that subject. I'm going to move on to Matt. Are there any cost-effective glass pivot doors as a replacement to sliding doors? They all seem incredibly expensive.
If I'm honest, I don't. I think the best value opening way to open glazing is sliding. I think if anyone was to ask me that, that would be my starting point. Obviously, let's start with the basics. If you've got an opening and it's glazed, the simplest and least expensive is fixed glazing. But quite often you need to be able to get in or out of it. So then you've got, well, I suppose it's hinged doors that are just simply hinged from the side. They're called casement doors or casement windows. Then there's the sliding option, which I do think is probably still the best value. There's concertina, and I would say in a way pivoting, which is when it's fixed the top and bottom, and part of the door opens out and part of the door kind of comes in, which is very elegant because you get very slender framing, is maybe the most expensive.
Is that something Schüco provides? Are you in the world of pivot doors at Schüco, or is it a bespoke item? Or?
Oh, no. Yeah, it really is. We utilize our actual sister company, Janssen, for our steel framed items, and those systems can achieve a pivot door for sure, but not from Schüco themselves. The
short answer is it's probably the most expensive way of putting a door in, hence the prices you're probably finding. Monique has got in touch to say, I'm moving to my new house this year. I want to make a bedroom, shower, walk-in closet, and maybe a small office in the attic, maybe with a hip-to-gable conversion. Any tips on how to make a plan for the attic with the roofs? So I'm going to go back to Jeremy on that one. Sounds like they need an architect to me.
Speak to an architect, or a builder first and then an architect.
It sounds to me like they want some advice on the form of the roof, perhaps.
Well, hip to gable, sort of classic, creates a lot of space. You can, if you're in the right place, do it under permitted development if you want to. But yeah, I speak to a local architect.
And in terms of, I think they were looking specifically for tips on how to lay out the space. Are there any sort of guiding principles that you have to observe in terms of ceiling heights, position of stairs, fire escape, etc., that will be the sort of the starting point for deciding how to utilize that attic space?
Well, I think the solution's got to fit the context. I'm not sure you can necessarily crowbar principles in. It would be a case of seeing what's there and what the constraints are.
So get on board, get a designer on board is
as soon as
the advice. Yep, okay. Mike is asking, I'd be interested to learn from the Schüco panel their approach to marine environments, including the use of powder-coated aluminium and the aspect of salt air, inherent rusting in locks, etc. I am replacing 15-year-old UPVC frames. So we're talking about particularly harsh climates on coastal areas of Britain, and a lot of coastal areas in Britain. What sort of system would you put in to keep down maintenance? So Ben, I'm going to ask you that one, but I'm going to have to ask Jordan to answer that one as well in a moment.
I think the specification of that needs to be considered from the outset, and marine environment specifications are a lot more stringent and higher performing than anything else with the salts in the atmosphere. So I know with stainless steel, for instance, there's a much higher grade you can put in. Jordan will provide information, I'm sure, about his products and what specification we need to achieve for particular Schüco systems in a marine environment.
And particularly, specifically here, they're talking about powder-coated aluminium. Is aluminium particularly vulnerable to salt corrosion, perhaps? Is that the right way to go? Probably one for you, Jordan. I think this is a technical question. I'll hand over to you.
Problem. Yeah, to be honest, aluminium itself is naturally non-corrosive, but as it's being cut, it creates raw edges, and that is where it can come unstuck. So when we look at marine grade environments, we're looking at something around, for aluminium coatings, of 60 to 80 microns thick of coverage with the coating. And then we also look at the fittings themselves and go to like an A4 grade instead of, I think, traditionally most fitting companies are with A2 grade stainless steel. So it's an up rate.
Thank you very much for that bit of advice. Katrina has got in touch saying, any ideas on retrofitting a house built in 1911 in a conservation area to make it more energy efficient. I have got single brick walls. Well, we've seen some fantastic passive house features. Matt, I'm going to hand that one over to you. Single glazed 1911 house. We're in a conservation area though, so that's going to limit choices. What can you do to make it more energy efficient?
Well, it's all about insulation, I would say. You need to put as much insulation into the building as you can, which is not too difficult. Start with the roof. If you can improve and upgrade the glazing, that's the next thing to do. Double glazed is going to be much better for your building than single glazed. There's no particularly good reason why you shouldn't be able to install double glazing, even in the conservation area. So those are the things I'd be starting with. Anybody else want to add anything to that question?
We've had quite a problem in certain boroughs and councils with replacing glazing in conservation areas. If in some cases you can, in some cases you can't, so you have to take it case by case. But one thing you could do is to put secondary glazing on the inside where you can't replace the single glazing on the window itself. I agree, try to put as much insulation in as possible and prevent air leakage. So if you've got leaky doors and windows elsewhere in the building, try to seal them up or replace them with new. If you can't replace all of the walls with insulation, try to put it in the loft, in an extension on the rear extension or the ground floor if possible.
A lot of people assume that putting in a heat pump instead of a boiler is going to be the solution to energy efficiency. Jeremy, is that necessarily the right direction?
Air source heat pump in lieu of a boiler. Well, I think that's probably a glimpse of the future. Yeah, but again, it's sort of doing the sort of cost benefits and whether there's diminishing returns for air source or even ground, geothermal piles. I'm seeing increasingly, these commercial systems are now burgeoning into the domestic market. So they're all on the table at the outset.
But would you say do the fabric first and then put the air source heat pump in, or is it worth putting? Will it work in a
passive measures
1911 house?
Yeah, absolutely. Fabric and as many sort of passive and permanent fixtures before you start introducing active systems.
Okay, this is an interesting one. LRW, not sure what it stands for, asks, I plan to renovate my 2-bedroom ground floor apartment, which has high ceilings and large windows, so it sounds like a nice period property. I'm on a tight budget. What should I prioritise? I'm going to ask you all of this. Your opinions will be interesting. Bathroom, kitchen, energy conservation or updating style. You're being asked to order those 4 factors. So the 4 are bathroom, kitchen, energy efficiency or style. You've got a limited budget. Which order do you put them in? Matt, you first.
I'm not sure this is the right order, but I suppose if it were me, I'd probably start with, organisation of space, right? That'd be the first thing. I don't know if that's one of the options. I'd then move into a decent kitchen. I'd improve the general kind of feel of the flow and organisation and layout of the space. And I've forgotten what the final option was. Bathroom, I guess, is probably last.
A style and bathroom are the last 2.
I don't know how.
Bathrooms are the bottom of the list. Bathrooms at the bottom of your list, is it?
Well, I mean, it isn't. I mean, how?
Well, it's easy to add later, of course. It's a difficult challenge, but I'm going to ask you all. There's no slipping out of this one. Ben, what's your order?
Well, budgets are tight, so we're going to have to consider how much change there can be within the space, and I think that will probably dictate anything that's done. I think style will have to be my first, because you're not going to be doing too many other major changes within the space, and it'll be about updating the bathroom, the kitchens. Energy efficiency might have to come further down the line because I don't think the budgets will stretch to that. But so yeah, go for style.
Style above all else. Interesting. Joe, I'm going to ask you too, Jordan. So I know you're the technical guy, but you're having a shot at this one. I want your opinion too. Sure. Jeremy, what's your order? Jeremy first, then I'll come to you, Jordan.
So if these are all cost-driven decisions, I think your style is kind of going to be derived from how you kind of target the other sort of sections. So bathroom and kitchen can obviously follow later in another phase. And then whatever energy improvement measures you can incorporate are going to benefit kind of the long-term cost and any sort of carbon capturing or offsetting that you can include at the outset.
Jordan, what's most important to you? You can't say change the windows first.
I really think it's how. how someone actually utilizes their own home. So the organization of the space, I really think the style and the organization are really key to the first changes in a building.
I think the overriding theme there, and it's very, very good advice, is spend the money on things that you are going to change for the long term, and then the bits that you can add later, like a nice new kitchen and a bathroom, they can wait till money allows. I think that's really sound advice coming from all of you there. Sorry to put you all on the spot. I enjoyed that. Next question is, how does corten steel change over the years? I like the look, but I'm concerned that it may degrade. I thought that was the whole point.
Corten is essentially rusty metal. It doesn't sound very glamorous. But when metal rusts, the rust forms protection on the outside coating of the surface of the metal. So you can get various types of corten, and you get corten which is already sealed and has a kind of a certain finish to it, which protects it for longer. I think corten has got a bad reputation for runoff, where you get a kind of a rusty runoff that can stain adjacent materials. So you have to be quite careful in how you select it. But I think if you can get a surface treatment to it that would protect the corten and seal it, then it shouldn't be any problem at all. But I think Matt's probably got a little bit more experience with his roof on the project he had earlier, so I might defer to his wisdom on this as well.
Ben's dead right. There are different types of corten that can be selected. The runoff is a very important thing to consider. The rusty water does run off if the corten isn't properly sealed. So you have to make sure you get the right product and the right sealant, and it's correctly applied. It's not that complicated, though. It just needs to be considered.
Okay, moving on to another question. This is from AC. I'm going to ask Jeremy first. Do you tend to recommend builders or let the client go out to tender based on your final drawings with structural calcs to builders of their choice based on recommendations made to them by friends and family? Or are those two things mutually exclusive? Perhaps not.
Good question. I tend to do both, actually. I keep all options on the table. If there are good people I've worked with and we've got a good working relationship, then definitely I know I'm going to get a quality tender from them. But then if a client has had a glowing review for a builder, then absolutely let them join in as well and pitch their hat in.
Cheryl has come in. I think she's just come out with something that's really very nice, saying fantastically inspired projects. Thank you very much. Well done. Sammy commented on Matt's house, saying this looked really nice. Kudos. Love the last pictures of your garden room. We're just starting reconfiguring and extending a 1930s bungalow. So we wonder if we could use that cladding on the back of the extension. So I think they're referencing the cladding on the garden room there, the one with the sedum roof that sort of was almost invisible when viewed from upstairs. Is that appropriate for an extension?
Absolutely. You can use the same detail. In fact, we have used well, not exactly the same, but a very similar detail on an extension to a London house some years ago. It's a simple thing. It's not very expensive. You do have to consider waterproofing, but yeah, you can use it. Of course you can. Get in touch and I'll tell you how to do it.
Excellent. So we've got a question here, and it says, is it better to use local authority building control to sign off steps in the build, or a private building control company? We've made reference to approved inspectors earlier on, specifically in relation to using the carbon offset method to have bigger areas of glazing. Or is it just a personal choice, or is it based on cost or who your builder prefers to work with? I guess they're asking, what are the factors to weigh up in deciding whether to go with local authority building control or work with an approved inspector? You'll all have opinions on that, I'm quite sure. Jeremy, do you want to jump in first?
Yeah, well, I've done both. I can say there's pros and cons of both. I mean, with my scale of sort of, smaller to medium-sized domestic, I tend to use approved inspectors just because, there's usually a quicker response time. And it's potentially a little bit cheaper as well than local authorities. But as I say, I have used both, so wouldn't rule out either.
Ben, what's your experience of the two?
I think the private approved inspectors can work really well as part of the design team from the outset of projects, and we pretty much only use the private companies. The local authorities are great, but I think they're more suited for the smaller projects, which are less complex, and you might put together a set of documents you then send to them for approval and for comment, and they do a plan check. but that's often after you've done the design work. So I think depending on the complexity of the project, if you want to have someone on board at an earlier stage, then they can be really useful in terms of navigating the ways around or ways to kind of get over certain hurdles within the building regulations that I don't think local authorities really have the wherewithal to assist with.
We've got John asking, there seems to be a move towards more responsibility for longer into the future for architects. Do you remain on the hook for future performance of your work in perpetuity, or is that somehow limited by time? I suppose that might reflect the change in the, looking at BIM modelling and lifetime performance of homes, and REBA stage 7, which is, it looks at performance rather than here's some plans, now go and build it. Thank you very much. There must also be referencing, I think, probably to collateral warranties here and architect certificates. So quite an interesting and complicated area. But I think it's one certainly worth going into, because it's something a lot of people considering a home improvement project will need to weigh up, including, retaining the architect beyond the planning and construction drawing phase. What's the value brought in, and, how important is it to retain the architect throughout the project once you actually are on site and thereafter, going back to the question. I can start with Jeremy.
We sort of try and obviously limit our liability on every project as far as possible. You don't necessarily want 12 years plus runoff, so for a back extension. And then really with the importance of retaining the architect, again, I've done projects that then haven't carried on, and either a builder has then picked it up after planning, or another architect, or I've also inherited projects, and each route comes with its own problems. But I'd say there is massive value in retaining the original designer through to then the technical and construction stage, because there is just a history of decision making and the original concept and the constraints, and just knowing the intricacies of the project that aren't necessarily going to become apparent until you've got the end result with the quirks that should never have been there. So yeah, massive, if you can afford it, then keep the architect all the way through.
Ben, do you want to add to that? In particular, I think reference the question about planning the ongoing life of a house post completion, and certainly planning its performance and longevity.
Yeah, I think you need to design in robust detailing from the outset, and specify materials that have longevity built in. A lot of manufacturers' products will only come with 5 or 10-year warranties, even though the product itself might last a lot longer. I think if you can choose materials that have a natural life to them, a lot of natural materials will have that, and build in a way that, in some ways, like the Victorians and the Georgians and previous generations built. They use simple materials, brick, tile, timber. Those or lead, even those materials will last for generations. So I think it's about the correct specification of materials. You will need to specify materials that do have shorter life expectancies. But again, you just try and detail them in as best as possible. You look at the particular details to make sure that you're not going to cause any problems with damp proofing in the future, or that you're allowing proper drips on the edge of external parapets, etc. So it's about understanding how buildings perform technically, and building in those safety measures as much as you can, and really considering that from the outset. But it's a huge area, and it's something that we need to be kind of craft people in the way that we build stuff and detail it. And then obviously there's the warranty aspect to all of this, that the architects will either limit themselves to 6 or 12 years liability, depending on the type of contract that they enter into. And that's generally the kind of perceived extent of liability. But that probably doesn't want to go much longer than that. But I think that the product themselves and the construction will last a lot longer than the warranty that the product will have.
Matt, do you want to add to that before we wrap up, because we are running out of time? So I might get one more question.
Well, I'll just quickly add that I think it is a great idea to keep the architect involved. I mean, I know it's kind of obvious I'm going to say that because I am an architect and I'm going to promote using an architect, but I also think that that's going to bring an awful lot more to your project. I think that anyone doing a project, if they can manage to bring on board an architect, then I would advise it, and they will help you whether it's at the beginning of the project, throughout the project, and also post completion. And if there is a little problem on site, there's something's not working properly, something, then they will hopefully be there. I mean, not forever, but sort of initially to help out. So, I mean, that's all I really wanted to add.
I think that's a really great point to end our Q&A session on. Sorry if we didn't manage to fit in your questions. We will follow up replies afterwards, as long as you did remember to include your email address. Thank you very much to all of our architects: Ben Cousins from Cousins & Cousins, Matthew Giles from Matthew Giles Architects, Jeremy Foster of J Foster Architects. Also to Schüco's UK Architectural Project Manager, Jordan Vincent. Thank you, Jordan. You're part of the in-house customer team at Schüco, which are always available to help you with advice should you need it on your project. In addition, Schüco have a showroom, their UK headquarters in Milton Keynes, which is well worth a visit. A great place to go and explore the possibilities. And you can find out, of course, more online at schüco.com/UK/homeowners. I'm sure you can follow the link if you just go to schüco.com as well and find the relevant pages for your project. If you did miss anything, there will be a replay, and we'll send out a link to you by email, plus contact details for any follow-up questions that you may have about your project. Thank you very much indeed for watching.